You'd think after having done so many of these, I'd be running out. But lucky for no one, the seasonal anime cycle churns these out like a crap factory with a broken assembly line. Well, that's not fair. Even crap serves a purpose, I suppose. But look at me dumping on today's pick when I haven't even introduced it yet. See, and there it is. You know, on second thought, take it back. I don't want it. Even if it's not refundable, I don't care. So follow me as I talk about trends, history, and trying in vain to fill the empty void that is my YouTube channel with dumb videos about Isekai. But before you get ahead of yourself, let me remind you that this isn't a review, but a history and cultural impact retrospective. And today's series is another in that pimply period where Isekai was blooming into its own. That's right, we're looking at Mondaiji-tachi ga Isekai kara kuru so desu yo. Or problem children are coming from another world, aren't they? Starting as not a web novel once again. That's starting to become the norm now. It was much more common for franchises in this period to start as actual light novels or manga, and Isekai being a budding subgenre in the fantasy and shonen breed was no exception. As while self-publishing was a thing back then, how serious the industry took it was a different story, as there was less a concerted effort to selectively harvest material from these platforms. So people actually had to approach a publisher to get their stuff released. So for this specifically, when exactly was it? Well, the series got its start in 2011, where it ran for 4 years, to the day coincidentally enough, and shifted to part 2 under a new title and illustrator. The series is technically still in development, though releases for new volumes have slowed down significantly, with about a year passing between installments, which is more than you can say about the manga adaptations, as this has two. The first being the main series retold in a new format, which has been on ice since 2014. Listed as finished by some sources, though I imagine that's hard to sell when the light novel continued long after that. When you're approaching a decade of content after wrapping up the manga adaptation, it's safe to say the ending was either rushed or non-existent, or the light novel's dragged out. Hard to say for sure. Anyway, the series got itself an anime adaptation not long after its light novel debut, and strangely not long before its manga ending in 2013. Most cores for shows run 12 or 13 episodes if they're lucky, or 10 if they're not. Poor Konosuba. And this falls in that 10 episode camp. Along with an OVA, this left fans of the franchise waiting for a season 2 to hit. And unfortunately, with the slowing light novel releases, dead manga adaptations, and zero word on a season 2 after 8 years, it's fairly safe to assume this one's dead in the water. And that's why this is intriguing. Released in the lull between Isekai Explosion and the Progenitors, while the genre was finding its own footing, this series had some early success that petered out hard. Was it due to slow progress or lack of support from publishers and the studios? Or just that it was a passing fad while other stuff was on the horizon? It's hard to say for certain, as there's not exactly exit polls on anime. But seeing this one rise so quick and get shot out of the sky while series that came in the coming years exploded with popularity gives us a hint. So, problem children. It's an isekai, obviously, meaning the usual suspects of dude and dudettes, otherworld, amazing powers. But how exactly did they get there? Well, as going to the other world, the entire namesake and point of isekai, is sort of a given, the process is pretty well explored in just about every way. So much so that just about every option is a trope in of itself. Reincarnation, summoning by inhabitants, being brought there by a deity-like entity with immense power, and this series is no exception. It follows the summoning tradition, but at least it differentiates itself. Instead of plucking the characters from their world randomly, the cast is given invitations on the promise of ending their boredom with their everyday lives. Also coming from different parallel versions of Japan and not necessarily ones in the same time period too. And that's definitely something that's gone by the wayside in recent years, with a larger focus on just getting there, and post hoc rationalizations that the characters' old lives sucked, so why bother going back? The more abrupt the world change, the better, at least going strictly by the evolution of trends. And definitely not a statement I agree with personally. So with an invitation to shake up the other world, the core cast agrees readily, which leads into the topic of the other world nicely. As an isekai, it's as you would expect. That means a fantasy setting that's generally underdeveloped by our standards but packs a magical element to set it apart, this one being a massive world the size of a star, while packing fantasy races and elements of our own mythology, as well as magical elements in the form of gifts. But you will notice I didn't say generic, however, as while many later franchises stick characters in a standard setting for a basic RPG with magic, guilds, dungeons, and monsters, earlier series were more open to experimentation. Looking back on a series like No Game No Life, Sword Art Online, and even Log Horizon, they took steps to flesh out the world so that they stood out from any plug-and-play MMO setting. With, say, a world that's basically a giant chess set, a massive floating castle the entire size of a world but lacking magic, and even a game setting where breaking conventions leads to innovation. This one tries to be more in that camp, by building the entire setting around a casino-like betting system as a fundamental rule. But what gives the characters not just an edge in that setting, but really allows them to even participate? Well, that would be the powers they have. Unlike most isekais where the cast is granted powers upon their arrival, the main characters had their gifts in their previous worlds. Like the ability to order people around absolutely, communicate with animals, or just be super strong. Or maybe he can just break the world. I don't know what this dude can do. I don't know if the series knows what this dude can do. I think he can just do anything that the plot calls for. Anyway, not exactly overpowered for most of them until they fully realize their powers. And certainly not the typical magic being the tool by which the protagonists succeed cliché, allowing for more innovative solutions. If you call punching really hard an innovative solution, I guess. So what makes this one stand out? Well, it's almost a petri dish for isekai as a concept. A meteoric rise from nothing, exploding into every medium it could, before trickling out into obscurity only to probably die off with nary a whimper. And don't get me wrong, this series did explode into popularity for its brief 15 minutes of fame. In 2013, after the first episode of the anime aired, the light novel sales doubled in that week alone. By the end of the anime's run, sales had quadrupled to over 850,000. It doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but the yardstick back then probably would have been Sword Art Online. And this really didn't hold a candle to that. So while it's definitely an isekai, it perfectly encapsulates the evolution of so many trends by contrast. The closest comparison in terms of other isekai would be No Game No Life, though even this predates that series in every medium. But with all the games and wagers adding an element of gambling and thus risk for the main characters, as well as being a fixture of the world itself, you see why that's an apt comparison. But this shows just how far isekai has come in a lot of ways. Aside from the meta-narrative of its popularity and subsequent fall into obscurity, the way it shows trends have evolved as well. From exceptional people going to other worlds to participate in them, to talentless otakus going there and subsequently given those worlds, so they can sweep up the whole story in the collapsing black hole that is their personalities, from a setting showing some creativity by attempting to be somewhat different than the others out there, to one that sometimes quite literally recycles the exact frame of their starter town, to even how the characters end up in these worlds, going there because they want to rather than being drawn in, and deciding it's cool to be abducted and forced to be a hero. Sounds like a blast. In that sense, this franchise really is a microcosm of isekai, and that's something I really didn't expect going in until doing this video, and certainly not something one would notice without some honed hindsight. But as for what it did for the genre, well, not much. This is basically a footnote in the grand scheme of things, as while people who watched it might remember, the industry has long since moved on. But it's an important footnote, as it demonstrates a lot of trends in the genre, while being a likely indicator of where it's headed in the future. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description. There you can also find a link to my Patreon where you can support me. Thanks for watching.